Okay, here's your icebreaker question to get you started today. How would you deal with being separated, geographically separated from a loved one? How would you deal with being geographically separated from a loved one? Would you communicate and how? Talk about that with your group, and when you're ready to dive into the scriptures, you can press play. So, we're continuing in our series that is entitled Love Letters, going through different letters in the Bible, and we're moving on to the third letter. We started with Colossians, then we moved on to Hebrews, and now we're starting the letter to the Romans, which is written by Paul. He is an apostle that is he identifies himself in the beginning of the letter. And as you read the first section of this letter, what I want you to see is that it's not unlike what we do when we maybe put an email together. It has a to section and a from section. The from is Paul, and he's identifying himself as in that from section. And then he tells us that it's to people in Rome who are believers, who are Gentile believers. Now, when he does the from, he does what we would do like on an email as an auto signature. He identifies himself to the people in Rome. We're going to find out later on in the letter it's because he's never met them before. He doesn't know, he hasn't seen them face to face. And so as we take a look at this, what I want you to do is to look at how Paul identifies himself. He does a little paragraph, really, of kind of introducing himself. And everything he does in the identification is really identifying himself in relation to Jesus. He identifies himself as a servant of Jesus. He identifies himself as an apostle, which means sent one, sent out by Jesus. And then he says that he is identified as a person who is bringing a message, a specific message, which we consider to be good or good news of the gospel. And when he identifies himself there, he's identifying himself as carrying a message to all people about Jesus. So my question as you read this passage is, when you write an email or when you write a letter, I know letters are kind of out of date, or when you put together your profile with your profile pictures on social media, how do you identify yourself? And do you identify yourself the way Paul did? Do you identify yourself in relation to Jesus? Why or why not? So read those, talk about those. You can press play when you're ready to continue. Paul goes on then, after his introduction, to start to tell the people in Rome, in the church in Rome, the most important thing that he has to say to kick things off. And that is that he was praying for them. He's praying specifically for them with some specific message, and I'd like for you to read the paragraph and see what it is that he is praying for them. And then what you find is that he really wants to be together with them face to face. He's never met them, and so he's trying to write to people that he's never met. And he's expressing his desire to be with them, to spend time with them, to be there face to face. And he starts off by saying, I want to be there so that I can build into you, so that I can impart wisdom, basically, to you. But then he sort of corrects himself and says, no, I really want to be there so that we can mutually encourage one another. And so what I'd like for you to do is to read that little section about prayer and talk about this combination. prayer and encouragement and how they work together, and why it's important that we gather together to pray for one another and to mutually encourage one another as believers in Christ. Read that, talk about that, and press play when you're ready to go to the last section. Well, the Apostle Paul continues on with the letter and his introduction and starts getting into the meat, which really we'll dive into more next week. But he starts using a word over and over again that actually we used in another series. And we reminded ourselves that the Greek word behind the scenes is translated in two ways. It's translated as good news, and it's translated as gospel. And what we did is I told you that every time you hear the words good news, I want you to say gospel, and that whenever you hear gospel, I want you to say good news, so that we could start to get that into our heads. What we're going to do with this series, with this part of the series, when we're going through the book of Romans, we're going to run into one of these words over and over again. And so I'm going to change what we say when we hear these words. When you hear good news, I still want you to say gospel. But when you hear the word gospel, we're going to change what we say. When you hear the word gospel, I just want you to say the phrase, we can walk together with God. Try that right now. We can walk together with God. One more time. We can walk together with God. And a third time, we can walk together with God. So whenever you hear gospel, I want you to say, we can walk together with God. And the reason is that the book of Romans, this letter, is going to start unpacking what that means, and so that we can see more of the picture. And so that phrase will allow us to start to put more of the picture together as we read through this letter. And Paul is going to use the word gospel. Good. We can walk together with God. He's going to use that word over and over again throughout this letter. And so I want to start getting that phrase in our minds whenever we hear that word. Go ahead and read this last section. He's going to use the word a couple of times in this section. And in fact, if you go back to what we've already read, you can see he's already used the word gospel in what we've read up to this point in time. And that term is just going to keep coming back over and over again. And so as you read this last piece, what I want you to do is to read that, think of the new phrase, say the new phrase. But more than anything, I want you to see that he talks about how it is power, it gives us righteousness, and it sets us up to be people who walk by faith. And so as we finish up this last section, I just want you to talk about that concept. How does gathering together with one another help us to walk by faith? When we gather together with other believers, people who believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God, how does that help us to walk by faith? Faith in Jesus, the Jesus who brought us the good news of the gospel. Read that, talk about that, and then since you are already gathered together, take the time to pray for one another and encourage each other so that all of us will walk by faith. Know that I'm praying for you. I hope that this video is an encouragement to you, and that I'm grateful that in this way we are able to walk together with God, with each other. God bless.